On this episode of Between Two Beers, we talk to Sarah Gregorius. Shay, who is Sarah Gregorius?
Well, she's one of 10 Football Ferns Centurions. She's played at 2 Olympic Games and 3 Women's World Cups. She played professionally in 3 different countries and has successfully graduated to a career in football governance with the New Zealand PFA and now FIFPro in Amsterdam. But we caught up with her in Sweden.
Yeah, great episode. We talked about the Andreas Heraf fallout of 2018 and Sarah's role in protecting the young players. We talked about power-hungry lesbians, or PHLs. And we talked about playing professionally in Germany, England, and Japan and the barriers there, and the emotional journey of 100 games for the Football Ferns. We talked about getting duct taped to the treatment table in Samoa and many stories in between. This episode was sponsored by Raw Coaching. Unleash your power. Build cultures, develop leaders, unleash legends. rawcoaching.co.nz. Raw Coaching does 3 things. Brings the lessons from high-performance sport into your business to help you develop a winning culture. Arms leaders with tangible skills to lead with confidence. Brings a personal performance coach in your corner to help you kick ass. Deeply connect to who you are, identify what you want, remove obstacles, go and get it. A personal coach will hold you to account to develop world-class self-chat and unleash all of you. If any of this sounds like you, go to rawcoaching.co.nz to speak to one of their team. Great episode. Hope you enjoy. Sarah is particularly sharp and articulate and has a lot to say. Enjoy this one because we sure did. You can watch this on YouTube or listen wherever you get your podcasts. Enjoy. Sarah Gregorius, welcome to Between Two Beers.
Thanks for having me. Can't wait.
Yeah, we're excited. Seamus and I are sitting across from us in our Hamilton studio. You are in Sweden and it is Tuesday morning, so you're heading off to work after this interview, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's literally just replacing one laptop for the other, heading off to work. But yeah, I'll do that after this.
Fantastic. Well, look forward to getting into what exactly that means. But Shay, why don't you get us started? How do you know Sarah?
I think we crossed paths for the first time in Samoa in 2006 at the OFC Under-20 Women's Championship. So she was part of, I guess, what became the golden generation of Football Ferns, starting their journey way back when. And then we've kind of crossed paths here and there. She's someone I probably admire a lot, actually, in the football space. The work that she's done previously, the work that she's doing now at FIFPro, which we'll get into. And I think she probably rivals Scylla for the title of, I'm not sure how you say it, but most hungriest, I don't know, PHL, which we can get into later. But she's definitely up there in that internal ranking system. But Steve, I think virtually this is the first time that you've met Sarah?
Yeah, never met Sarah before. I think I commentated on one of her games once in Papua New Guinea. Yeah, horrible place, but good fun to commentate. And I've watched you a lot. I've seen you at World Cups and Olympics and followed you from afar and really enjoyed your media work when you were doing the punditry and hosting the football shows. I actually thought you were really a big loss to the New Zealand football scene when you moved overseas because you provided a sort of a level of insight and articulate voice which we'd sort of been lacking. So it was really sorry to see you go, but I was happy to see the path that you were taking, and it looked like a great career move. But where are we starting tonight's episode, Shay?
Well, we'll get Sarah to jump in a minute, but I did mention 2006 in Samoa. Now, a few episodes ago, we had Dr. Mark Fulcher on, who was part of, I think, a 2-person medical team on that tour, and he shared part of a story, or the intro to a story, and I'll paraphrase a little bit, and then we'll chuck to Sarah on her recollection. But he sort of said that a member of the medical staff was caught in the act of taping our guest tonight, Sarah Gregorius, to a treatment table at the team hotel. And as that was happening, head coach John Herdman walked in the room. And I think it's fair to say that both Fulch and this unnamed other member of medical staff are probably lucky that they retained their roles and were invited on future tours. But Sarah, what's your recollection of being taped to a treatment table?
Well, before we get into that story, I really want to know who told you about what a PHL is, but you've skated over that real quick, but I'm coming back to that. The 2006 story, yeah. So the 2-person medical team was, I mean, they're legends in their own right. Dr. Mark Fulcher and Mr. Roland Jeffrey, who's, certainly been around several football teams over the years, bit of a physio legend. But so it was a fairly long tour in Samoa, and I think understandably people get I don't know, under each other's skin maybe a wee bit, or you start to get a bit cheeky, and you kind of good form and decorum goes out the window. So I was actually in the treatment room getting treatment, right? I wasn't just in there for fun. And I think what I find strange about this story is it was a coordinated attack on me by the medical team, which means that they'd spoken about it. They'd spoken about it in the build-up. Like, how has that conversation gone down between Fulch and Roland? Like, okay, like tomorrow, I think Gregorius is coming in, and we'll get her. Like, I'll hold her down, and you get the tape, and it'll be good. Like, how does that discussion happen, and how is that appropriate? First of all. Yeah. But yeah,
well, those two gentlemen. Just again, I don't want to kind of cloud the story, but it's an under 20 team. Are you 17, 18? 19.
19. Okay. 18 or 19, depending on when in the year it was. I think I would have been 19. And I'm not sure that makes it any better. I have a young place, So I'm in there getting treatment. Obviously, it's a tough place to go somewhere, and we'd been there. I think we were there for about 3 weeks. And yeah, they coordinate this attack where one of them holds me down and the other one has like the thick strapping tape, and they're strapping me to the table. And I'm like, I'm obviously being attacked, so I'm terrified. All trust gone out the window for these two. And then John walks in, and he just sort of looks at what's going on, and he just kind of walks back out again. So I feel like all 3 of them failed me. Like, John should have at least tried to untie me from the table or reprimanded the 2 of them. But yeah, it was a strange time. It was a really strange time.
I'd be more concerned about the waste of consumables. Knowing New Zealand football as I do, that sort of misuse of tape, that's reprehensible.
I feel like they were so committed to this joke that it probably came out of their own back pocket, like that's how much they wanted to do this. It was weird.
Yeah, not short of a buck, Fulcher and Roland. That would have come out of their own bank accounts. How long were you actually taped? Did they leave you taped to the table for?
I actually don't remember. I think I might have PTSD. I might have blacked it out. I don't think I was there for long. I think if John actually hadn't walked in, it could have been a lot worse. But maybe it was like reality slapped them in the face, and they were like, "We should probably let this young woman go." So.
Having that experience at such a young age, did that set the tone for you pranking people yourself as your career progressed?
I don't actually think I was that much of a prankster. I was certainly the one to go along with the prank. Like, if I knew someone else was going to be in for it, I was like, yeah, I'm on board. What do you need? Maybe it did set the tone a wee bit for some irreverence during my career, and maybe, I don't know, moments in my career where I've gone like this with New Zealand football. Maybe it started because of the attack of Roland and Fulch all those years ago. I mean, maybe it set the tone for that. I have to think about that.
Okay, well, I'm not sure how many episodes you've listened to on Between Two Beers, but we seem to have sort of themes that we keep coming back to. And one of my favorite when we get Football Ferns on is to talk about Andreas Heraf, because I think it's an incredibly interesting passage of recent history, and something that I know you were very closely involved with. Before I get into providing a little bit of background and setting the scene, I just want to read out a few quotes from some of your colleagues and former teammates, just to give a bit of an idea of the character that you are, so that we know when you're dealing with a situation, who we're talking about is dealing with it. So Emma Kete has said, former Football Fern, Sarah's an amazing, incredible person, and probably the most intelligent person I've ever met. Maya Jackman has said, her and Christy Hill are probably the 2 people I admire the most for all they stand for and the way they conduct themselves in life. So with that sort of framework, I want to dive into June 2018, because this is the start of Heraf's downfall. He eventually got sacked for creating a toxic environment of bullying, intimidation, and harassment. But June 2018 was the catalyst. That was the game where you were in the squad, lost 3-1 to Japan. It was a record crowd. I think it was 7,200 in Wellington. But a lot of local fans were kind of left scratching their heads because the team set up in a 5-4-1 formation. I think they held 27% possession across the game. And Heraf sort of defended the approach by saying the aim was to work on a defence with an eye on next year's World Cup. More broadly, he said New Zealand could not compete with the talent countries like Japan have. And I'll just read just the exact quotes that kind of lit the fuse. He said, "We will never have that quality to compete with Japan and even be better than Japan. That's not working. Japan have, I think, 127 million people in their country. We have 4.5 million. So there must be a difference. There is more money, more facilities, better coaches in the country. The gap is that big. So for that, I think we tried to do our best and the girls have done that." Now, that was quite a statement to make for the person responsible for not only coaching the Ferns, but overseeing the entire high-performance program in New Zealand. And it was only his 5th game in charge, so he was sort of immediately challenged on his suggestions that was he starting his tenure from a negative mindset. And I remember he got into this back and forth with a journalist in that press conference, and Heraf sort of said, "Well, what would you prefer?" And the journo said, "Well, try and play some football." And he said, "What, and lose 8-0? And the journo said, "Well, when have they ever lost 8-0? And he said, "Well, no, but you could lose 8-0 against a team like Japan." So I guess my question to you, Sarah, is when all this was happening, I mean, you're not in the press conference, but are you catching wind of this like as soon as it's happening? Is it starting to reverberate around social media, and then are you just swept up? Because I remember it was for 2 or 3 weeks afterwards, it was full on. But when did you first catch wind of his comments, and how did that affect you?
I mean, I have to be really honest with you. I don't actually care about those comments. And at the time, I didn't either. I mean, it's embarrassing, don't get me wrong, to hear a guy talk about you publicly like that. But to be honest, it didn't hold a candle to what he was saying to us privately. So you also have to understand that, in my opinion, he should never have been in charge of that game anyway. Like the things that happened afterwards with the, I guess, the investigation, the review into his conduct, that behavior was there not based on how we were playing or how he set us up. It had nothing to do with that. So the comments about the game and about the way that we play, I mean, yes, as a proud athlete and as a proud member of a football team that has been extremely competitive against Japan over the years. I've played Japan in Japan and we've drawn 1-1 with them in games that we've been leading. So yeah, from a proud member of the Football Ferns and part of that very strong legacy, yes, it's terrible that he said those things, but it's the least of the issues that we had with him, to be honest. So I think at that time, yeah, hearing those comments, it was like, yeah, okay, that's one thing, but we actually have something much larger that we need to tackle with this individual. And that's more important. And that was certainly more of my focus. I can't speak on behalf of the other girls, but for me personally, it wasn't so much about his post-game press conference. It was about everything that was unfortunately going on at that time. And I think in the immediate aftermath for me as well, putting the game to one side, it was the first time I'd played a home international in Wellington. And I had so many friends and family in the stands, and I wasn't proud of the way that we played, but I was very proud to be playing, if that makes sense, in front of them. So I was also enjoying those moments, and I'm glad that I did enjoy those moments because that was the only opportunity I had to play in Wellington as a Football Fern. So yeah, I think for me it was less about his comments and more about everything else that was going on at that time.
Yeah, the reason that the press conference stuck out to me is the snowball effect that it had afterwards. So I was working in the media at the time at the Herald, so we weren't particularly aware of all of the underlying sort of disruption Heraf was causing with the staff. But then after the press conference, it all started to come to the surface. So I sort of wonder if he hadn't have said those things, would he still be in the job today? Or was there that undergrowing current already, and would this movement have happened without that catalyst?
Yes, I think it would have happened regardless. But to be honest with you, I think the media attention, he maybe took the shovel and took the first sort of stab at the dirt of digging his own grave a wee bit, because I think he underestimated the passion that it like kind of instilled, because he was so negative in kind of the wider public. And I think it pulled the rug up, to be honest with you, but there were already some ugly things under that rug anyway. But I think it certainly increased the scrutiny that he found himself under, for sure. I think for us as players, it was beneficial to have, don't get me wrong, it was very challenging as well to have that type of attention on a very sensitive issue, but I think it did help in the end to ensure that it wasn't a trend or anything like that. It was a sustained spotlight that was on both him and the organization for a period of time, and I think that did help.
I was with the All Whites at that stage. We were on our way back we had a tournament in India, and I think we might have been at an airport in Australia in transit on the way home when the comments were coming out in the media. And I can't remember who I was sitting next to, but I was just thinking, this guy's got New Zealand. He's just missed the boat completely on what New Zealand is about and what is going to piss people off. And it was the I guess the way that the comments came across. Even when you're sitting in an airport reading it on your phone, you're going, fuck me, this is not good. You hint that like you're not going to come out of this looking okay. Like New Zealanders just won't stand for it.
No, absolutely not. And yeah, I mean, he's a foreigner. Perhaps he underestimated that, but I think I can't imagine those comments landing well anywhere in the world, let alone in a place like New Zealand that is so patriotic and so proud when it comes to its sportsmen and women.
So Sarah, what was your personal relationship? I know Heraf was responsible for actually pulling you out of retirement. He sort of convinced you to come back. So was it a good relationship to start with, which quickly soured when you caught on to some of these sort of bullying methods, or how did that sort of evolve?
Yeah, it was an interesting one because we sat down and had a couple of conversations, obviously, about coming out of retirement. He'd watched me play in the National Women's League and thought that I still had something to offer. I was quite resistant, and it was actually linked to, we were in negotiations through my role with the New Zealand PFA with New Zealand Football about a new collective bargaining agreement. And so I had a lot of interaction to do with him and New Zealand Football through that. And that was obviously quite a positive milestone in our sort of journey as a team, and as particularly for me as a collective group of players with both the Football Ferns and the All Whites. And so my decision was, I mean, the idea was floated by him, but it was also quite linked to that and what was going on in that space. And I think personally for me, with my time away from the team, I'd gained a different perspective, and I thought that coming back to the team, yes, I could offer something on the field. Like, I was still reasonably fit and had a little bit left in the tank, but also through the period of coming under the new CBA, and I guess just making sure that everything was steady through that transition, I was very keen on that as well. So my relationship to NZF and to Andreas through that time was a little bit also, I guess, not clouded, but it was tied quite closely to that as an achievement. And then through the time that he was in charge of the team, we didn't necessarily have a bad relationship. I think as any type of empathetic person, I obviously was not in agreement with his methods. But I wouldn't say that him and I had a terribly combative relationship. I don't think it was like that. I think he sort of respected where I was coming from with the return to the team, and sort of just let me have the role that I had within the group, and it wasn't really something that we clashed over.
Because let's talk about your role within the group. From the outside looking in, you've been at the centre, it seems, of a lot of kind of the cultural aspect of it. Like any Ferns tour, there's always videos that come out, there's always skits, there's bits and pieces, and you seem to be at the forefront of a lot of that. So it's often hard reflecting on your own role in these things, but were you kind of the kingpin in terms of that team culture and that kind of banter amongst the group? It's okay to say yes. It's a safe space.
No, I think there's probably a couple of different ways of looking at it. Like you talked about 2006, and in that 2016 with some very strong personalities that have now spent the best part of a decade and a half together, right? So people like myself and Ellie Riley, I think we have been very close for a very long period of time, and I think having the personalities and the extroverted personalities that we have, yeah, I think a lot of the stuff with regards to the banter and that vibe and that culture I think we sort of grew into that, but I don't think I would have had that without her. And I think I probably helped her a little bit in that sense too. So I think culture is never driven by one person. It's always usually driven by quite a strong nucleus. And I do think I formed part of that nucleus, but certainly it's not something I think I would have been able to bring to any environment at any time. I think it just happened to be a special group. And I think longevity also had a major role to play in that. And then I think with regards to the other stuff, more the off-field, I think that also has a lot to do with the PFA more broadly. And also the group, the Football Ferns as a group, kind of always encouraging me to take that role on behalf of the team, which has been massive for my personal and now career development too. So I think I've been, rather than having, I don't know, a taste for these things, I think I've also been kind of put forward in a lot of situations, which I think has impacted my development and probably my role within the group. So I don't know if it's anything really to do with me. I think it's maybe more to do with the circumstances around that kind of shaping me.
Did you feel, obviously, of your senior role in the team, a sort of sense of responsibility to protect some of the younger Ferns when this was happening in 2018? That, you know, it was, like you said, it was quite a turbulent few weeks and there was a lot of attention. Did you really need to use all your leadership skills to drive them to sort of safe waters? Yes,
100%. I felt that responsibility. It gives me goose. I still feel that responsibility. Like, it was all about, it was a very difficult time, and it was all about not making it difficult or making it less difficult for others, because I already knew that my time in the team was coming to an end, but there were some players in there that were at the start of their careers. And so this could very much dictate how the rest of their 10, 15, 5-year, however long they might be, those careers. So it was very, very much about being a leader, but also very much a shield, because it was unpleasant. But some people can handle that, and some people were in a position to handle that, and others maybe not so. So it was about, okay, can we maybe put this on the shoulders of some people who can continue to stand tall and really try and make sure that others who don't perhaps have it wasn't even about strength. I think it was also about like just experience to kind of guide the rest of us through. Certainly felt that hugely.
So the Heraf departure was a bit of a catalyst for a lot of change at New Zealand football. Andy Martin went, and whole raft of changes. Did you think that was much needed? Was that overdue? Was that all a good thing?
Yeah, I think it was. Otherwise, the review wouldn't have landed the way that it landed. I think, I've thought about it a lot. I think Andreas was almost a symptom of a disease, really, or like was a manifestation of something that was perhaps quite rotten within the culture and the organization of New Zealand football. And I think eventually that got exposed. And so I think when you have that as an organizational culture, if your organizational culture is wrong, you will produce, or you'll get out what you put in. Do you know what I mean? Like they arrived at a person like Andreas because that's obviously what they were looking for. That's obviously what the organization was attracting at that time. So I think that's Andreas is one thing, and I think his interactions with us as a team and the way that relationship went or obviously didn't go was one thing, but evidentially it was just part of something much, much larger. And I think that was really, for me, an interesting point to say that, like, sometimes you have to deal with these, I guess, kind of fringe incidents, but often they're linked to something much greater. And I think, I'm really sort of philosophizing now, but in the current climate, in terms of world football and world society, where we're talking about Black Lives Matter and we're talking about incidents of bigotry and racism and things like that often, and what's getting spoken about now is like the institutions and the systems and the structures that actually allow for that to happen. And I think that was kind of the case in 2018 with Andreas. It was the structures and the systems and the organizational culture that actually allowed that to happen. And so I think in addressing obviously that incident with Andreas and the incidents building up to his eventual removal, it just showed that structurally something was really off. And fortunately, through the review and through, I guess, ripping off the Band-Aid, we were able to really see what happened when the organization bled out, and it was necessary, I think. So I'm actually quite, I wouldn't say, I don't want to see anyone's career or anyone's livelihood be ruined or like reputation sort of go in that direction. But I think for the greater good, it was a necessary point in the history of New Zealand football as an organisation to take stock and to look at the structures and look at the systems that were in place at that time that actually led to an incident like that occurring. And I think addressing that was the right thing to do. And so I'm glad that the review was extended in that way.
Were there any specific moments that stood out as something being really wrong that you're wanting or open to talking about?
Like within the Ferns or within New Zealand football?
Yeah, within Andreas, you know, we talk about the sort of culture of bullying and the toxicity or whatever. But is there anything that really you thought you saw something happening and thought, shit, this is really wrong?
I think rather than not so much incidents, I think what people need to understand, and I think I was appreciative of the media coverage, but at the same time it was frustrating, and we were obviously under this kind of code of silence as well while the review and the investigation was taking place. Like, if a player says to you, I will walk away from the game before playing in this environment and for this individual, you have to understand that it's not even the last resort for them. It is the last resort, because it's not the same as putting in a complaint in a normal work environment where you say, well, okay, I'm working as an accountant over here. I don't like the environment. I don't like the way I'm being treated. I think it's evidence of X, Y, Z. I'm going to put in a complaint and then I'll go and work for another firm. Like, you can't, it's not as if like, oh, awesome, Norway are hiring, I'll go and play international football for them. Like, I'll give up on this lifelong dream, on this lifelong passion. So I'm not even sure if it's about whether or not certain incidents triggered it. I think you have to understand that if half of the team would rather walk away from the passion and the dream of a lifetime that you can never get back, if that didn't go in favor of the players, none of us can play again. And so if you're willing to risk that, then there is something seriously wrong. So it's not even about incidents. It's about looking at what the players are willing to do and what they were willing to walk away from. I think is the most sobering and the most stark indictment of how bad it was, rather than trying to put incidents out there and have the incidents be judged. If a player is willing to walk away from playing for their country, there's no takebacks. There's no applying to play for another team. Like, that is it. And I think that shows how serious it really was and how terrible and untenable the environment was. And it actually kills me that it even got to that point. That's how serious it had to get before it was properly looked at, before it was like, let's give this what it deserves, which is a full independent review and investigation. Like, I would have loved for it to have never got to that point, so that people didn't have to put in writing that they would rather walk away than stay.
What I think is really interesting about that, and I don't know how much you're aware of it being overseas, but we had a similar situation with players supporting Des Buckingham, and him, I guess, eventually leaving New Zealand football in his role with the 23s. And I guess players maybe took a look at the Ferns and that kind of example of player power and thought, well, fuck, we can't stand by and let this happen because we really believe in this coach and this kind of scenario. And it went the other way, which I think was it's a really peculiar one. I don't know. I can understand and I can hear the emotion in your voice around that being your only alternative, not playing versus playing. But then the flip side was players desperate for this guy to remain involved, and that kind of plea not being adhered to. Now, I appreciate there's kind of contractual issues around it as well that kind of come into play, and we've got COVID and all the kind of backdrop to it, but it just did seem really, again, like a really huge step for people to actually come out and publicly back the guy, and then for that not to kind of be adhered to.
I don't know too much about that situation in particular. I think the interesting debate to have is around what you say, player power. Because I think in our situation with the Ferns, players were so disempowered that they had to leave. So it was different. It was like, rather than feeling empowered because of a positive culture, it was feeling disempowered because of a toxic culture. So player power is an interesting one, because I think sometimes people can misconstrue it, right? So I think what I believe is, what you need to understand is your right as a worker to feel respected and dignified in your workplace, so that it's safe and fair, is the most important thing. Now, if you want to look at a situation where you're trying to create the most positive culture possible and putting together or trying to keep the ingredients that makes that opportunity real, you're actually already in a much more fortunate position than we were in 2018. Like, that is, I think it's such a huge credit to Des that players were willing to publicly back him. And it's an interesting conundrum for New Zealand football as well, because they're used to dealing with the opposite end of that spectrum, where player power, whatever you want to call it, is not to put forward a positive environment that people want to keep. It's to pull back the curtain on something incredibly ugly. So what I would always say to players, and this probably echoes a little bit of the work that I'm doing, is you just understand your rights. Educate yourself on what you're entitled to. Educate yourself on the best use of your leverage as a player. And just make sure that you're very clear and you're very strong about it. Because one thing that we had to be as a group in 2018 was like unbelievably strong and connected and united. But I think it's different because it was players felt so disempowered because of the toxicity of that environment. So I don't know too much about the Des Buckingham situation, but I think what blows me away is that you had players taking a stand in the positive rather than in the negative, because usually players only exercise that leverage when things are so terribly bad that they're inconceivably untenable. So, I mean, I don't know how Des feels about that situation from a personal point of view, and I don't know too much about how the players actually truly felt, but I mean, that's so far away from where we were a couple of years ago that it's almost like, oh, that's pretty cool. If that's where we're at now, if it's about retaining something positive rather than exposing something negative, I think if that's how players are using their power, that's pretty cool.
That was my next question. How have New Zealand football responded, in your opinion, from the disaster of Heraf and Andy Martin? Has things improved?
It's hard to know. I think things have improved. Like, oh my God, it couldn't have got any worse. The only way was up. Like, that's the thing about hitting rock bottom, is there's only one other way to go. I think certainly from a Ferns point of view, certainly putting in someone like Tom was exceptional. And I think from an organizational point of view, the winning of the bid for 2023, it was, I remember having this conversation with Riley after the result. Was like, it wasn't even imaginable, given where we were in 2018, that we would have something so unbelievably positive come out just in a matter of 24 months afterwards. So I think that's a huge credit to the organization, and a huge credit to the staff around the team as well, that they have actually, it's been quite transformative. And some of the players coming in now wouldn't have no idea that was part of our recent history, because there are no embers anymore of that. Like, the group really took a step forward as a collective. So I think the things have improved. I think there's always room for better. There's always room for more. I still think with the announcement of 2023, a lot of the things that need to happen within the program and within New Zealand football shouldn't now be overlooked, just because there's something so big on the horizon to focus on. I think particularly now, it should almost be an incentive to really pay attention to what's going on with the Ferns, to really look at the development that needs to happen between now and then to show finally, I think, probably unleash the potential of that group in particular, because, for some of those players, this will be perhaps the swan song. It will be the last time that they are as effective as they can be on the world stage. So I think the organisation and the Ferns can be really proud of where they're at right now, but I don't think it can be at the expense of still putting in the work that's required in 2023, but also the things beyond, because if you're not planning for 2027 now as well, you're going to get left behind the way that we did a few years ago.
Well, let's get into your playing career. You played 100 games for the Football Ferns, but you actually made a bit of a late start, a bit of a late bloomer. So you'd imagine most of the Centurions sort of broke through at an early age, 17, 18, you can see that they're going to be there for the future. But you didn't make your debut till you were 24. So what do you put down to that late start in your football career?
Well, I had a bit of bad luck. So I was meant to make my debut in 2009, but I tore my ACL. So that obviously put that one on the back burner a wee bit. But I also think if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have had as long a career, because I think it taught me a lot about, obviously, character and resilience, but also how to look after my body. And I'm not the biggest of people, so I had to be really strong and kind of put a bit more application to the tactical and mental side of the game as well. And I think I learned that through my injury, through that early setback.
I just take you back to that injury?
Mm-hmm.
Do you recall being on the team bus or being around the team bus shortly after the injury and Maya Jackman trying to console you?
Yeah, I do. I'd partially torn it before I even got to Japan, and then I completely ripped it in the second to last training session, and I was devastated. I can remember the feeling at that training session and all of that. But I mean, the ability of Maya and a few of the other girls to quickly, I was crying on the bus, and then they ended up being tears of laughter, because they really recognized that I was probably in quite a bad place. And Maya being there as well, she kind of was like, "This is probably about as bad as it can get, but we can. I think we can do something here to cheer you up."
Well, she shared a story off air through her episode where she recalls playing a word association game with you on that bus. And her recollection of this game was that you had to say the first thing that came to your mind when she said a word. Now, the word that she said was baby. Can you recall the word that you said that you associated with baby?
No, I 100% cannot, and I refuse to repeat it.
We'll leave that one. We'll leave that one out. I respect your boundaries.
Yeah, right.
You have a recollection of that story.
And I know she does, because she likes to bring it up in company with others. So it doesn't surprise me that she brought it up with you guys.
Yeah,
I don't actually know what the answer was. So
it rhymes with great, but it doesn't have the G on it.
It's not. Anyway. It's not. Let's talk about lighter topics.
So you ended up making your debut, I think, the following year in the OFC Nations Cup, which doubled as the World Cup qualifiers. How good was it to finally pull on that Football Ferns shirt and actually take the field? Yeah,
it felt really good. I mean, it felt so good that I was a bundle of nerves, and I think we won that game 12-0, and I played striker and didn't score a single goal. So that shows you how worked up I was. So it was a real blur, but I mean, I was just thrilled, but also I just wanted to hang on to it as long as possible. So I think I also carried a lot of determination, because I knew how quickly it could be snatched away from me. So I think I was, obviously thrilled and excited, but I was so determined just to hang on to it. And I think that translated into some overstimulation in terms of nerves. But in the second game, I calmed down a wee bit, and fortunately played right the way through till the World Cup in 2011, and changed my life.
Sarah, what were your strengths as a footballer? What got you to 100 caps for the Football Ferns?
I think I had some natural gifts and weaknesses. I'm naturally quite fast. I did athletics as a kid. And I think I was always on the quicker side of things. But I'm very small, about 156 centimeters. But I guess even though I had, I suppose, a bit of natural speed, but a limitation in terms of my size, I think it helped me develop into funnily enough, quite a robust player. When I managed to use my strength, but I also managed to use my strength in terms of being quick, but also like being a little bit smaller and being able to concentrate on my movement and things like that was really important. And I think gave me the ability to play kind of on the wing or as a 9. And I think over the years, particularly after spending a little bit of time in Japan playing as a professional, I developed reasonably good technical ability too. But I think it was certainly the way that I read the game and my adaptability that helped me a lot, because I don't think I was necessarily an explosive or tricky or any type of player, but I was consistent. I was a good teammate, I think, too, as well. I, defended from the front and things like that. So I think all of those things contributed to a reasonably long career. I just learned to refine the things that I was good at and not let the things that I didn't have slow me down, but in fact become part of the reason that I could be relatively, I guess, fly under the radar because I'm a little bit smaller. But yeah, I developed the ability to jump pretty high and good low center of gravity and that type of thing. So I don't think it was any one thing. I think I just was constantly kind of adapting and ensuring that I was on the team sheet and I was a player that people could rely on.
Because you kind of you're a late bloomer to the game in general, really. Like I think reliably informed, you started around 12 years old in Wellington, and unlike other footballers, I guess your family doesn't really have a football background. Is that right?
No, they don't, and they still to this day don't really understand how I got into it. But I'm a big believer in. I know that this kind of goes against a lot of the footballing philosophies, but I don't think anyone should specialize in football until they kind of have to. I think if you can do a range of sport, your body becomes a little bit more adaptable and you have the ability to, use and rely on other muscles and not get necessarily worn out as quickly. So I'm a big believer in that whole balance is better. So I think coming into the game late at 12 years old, I'm like fine with that. And also I think not having footballing parents was probably a bit of a blessing too. I was one of those kids that got adopted into a lot of other families who did have footballing parents, which was really cool. And like my mum and dad, like bless them, but I don't think that they could pass a ball to each other, even if they were standing 5 meters away, which is great because at the end of every game, if they happened to watch, I was one of 3 kids and we were all very active. It was, my dad would just get me in the car and be like, "Oh, that was so good when you did that thing, and I'm just so proud and did it." And I was like, "We lost 10-0," and he's like, "What?" And he didn't even like register to him that it was he just saw that I was happy and loved that I was happy, and my mum was the same. So I'm actually very grateful for all of those things. I'm grateful that I came into the sport late, and I'm grateful that I had parents that weren't, what's the opposite of pushy? Like they just did not. As long as I was happy and still trying to get to school some days, they were like, "You seem to be good and we're good with that."
So one of the most popular paths for teenage footballers in New Zealand is to go through the American college circuit. But at 17, when I imagine some American colleges would have been interested in you, you decided to go to Manly instead. How did you come about that decision?
A friend of mine, basically, she had the idea that myself and to her and another player would go over, players that all ended up being on that under-20 team with John Herdman. And yeah, I had some interest from US colleges, and I had interest also at that point from the New Zealand team. So I'd played a couple of seasons in the national women's team, and they were telling me that I had to get to Auckland, as they do, and become part of this elite training program. But my decision was less about probably what was the right footballing decision, but more about the commitment that I had made at that point. And so by the time all of this other interest came about, I'd already committed to go to Manly, and I wasn't going to go back on my word. So that's kind of, rather than it being probably the most strategic footballing decision, I was like, no, I've already told them that I'm going to go. They've made plans for me, and I'm not going to let anyone down. So sorry, but not sorry.
So was it a footballing holiday kind of thing? Like, did you have to work to support yourself as well?
Yes, we worked. I worked in McDonald's for a while. I worked at Rebel Sport. I worked in a deli. Like, it was very much like one of those really early, like, football is the focus and you just shape everything around it, sort of amateur / semi-pro environment. And it was really cool. I mean, I was like 17, 18, living in Manly, like a ferry ride from downtown Sydney, nightclubs and bars. I mean, I actually, to be honest with you, don't remember a hell of a lot about the football, but I remember a lot about the Sydney nightlife. So it was really, really cool.
Stephen and I are the big ones to partake.
I mean, yeah, it was not a bad place to be at that age. So it was like, yeah, football was the focus, but I mean, at that age, how focused are you when you have all of those other things on your doorstep? So it was also like a big, I guess, life experience for me too, moving out of home at such a young age. Yeah, that was cool.
Did you ever look at your teammates in America and think, what if, or have any regret about passing up that or was the path you took just the right one for you?
No, I didn't really look at it as a regret or I should have done that. No, I don't. It's just I don't know. I've never really been that kind of person, and I think the way that it all worked out for me was fine. I think even not making the New Zealand team and not being overseas at an American college at that point in my life meant that I was studying in New Zealand, ended up with an undergrad degree and got an internship at a really good company and a job that I really enjoyed. And so I think it all worked out in the end, and I achieved probably, one thing I will say is an advantage that I got was perhaps a little bit more life experience before I entered that kind of Football Fern professional bubble, which I think helped me a lot.
Yeah, you've kind of skipped ahead. So you returned to New Zealand from Australia, and then I think you got involved. I think the 20s were training full-time with John, or there was a kind of full-time program, but you elected to go to university in Auckland as well. And post that university career, start working with AA, is that right?
Yeah, so after the 20s, actually, I started my university degree at Auckland University of Technology, AUT. And then part of my last syllabus, I guess, for that was interning at a company, and it happened to be AA Tourism through one of my lecturers. And then they hired me at the end of my internship, which actually coincided with me doing my ACL. So I also managed to, during my rehab for my ACL, I spent a good year at that company, really like solidifying myself in my new position, which meant that as I got back involved with the New Zealand team, they were super understanding of me having to take time off to go away on tour and things like that. So again, it kind of like, it all managed to fall in my favor too. So that was kind of the space between under 20s and making the Football Ferns, was getting my degree and getting a job, and yeah, having a bit more of that typical early 20s experience.
What's the mindset there, Sarah? Early 20s, like, is the dream being a professional footballer? Like, is that what your dream job is, or would you ideally have a bit of football but also be building your career at the same side outside of football?
I don't think the dream was professional football, because in my world, in my understanding, there was no such thing as being a professional female football player. There was nowhere near the opportunity to do that, let alone the visibility around the opportunities to do that. So my focus was like, I'd really love to play for New Zealand. But what?
Needed a good agent. This is my weekly. This is Stephen has Heraf, and I have player intermediary. Yeah, I just wait for an opportunity to throw it in.
I mean, that's a whole nother rabbit hole if you want to talk about player intermediaries, particularly with my job now. But I think back then it was just not, it never entered my mind because it wasn't something that I was even aware of. Like, I just wanted to play for New Zealand, and I wanted to do that once, and then I wanted to do it again, and then I wanted to do it again and again and again. And then it only really entered the picture once we were in Germany playing at the World Cup, that all of a sudden there was interest from agents, I guess, Shay, but people that were like, well, you could play over here if you wanted and get paid for that. And then all of a sudden it's like, what? I can do that? I can do nothing else but play football? That's insane. And you'll give me money for it? Even better. So it wasn't really a goal, because I wasn't even aware that having that as a goal was feasible.
But before we jump to that World Cup experience, we've had Maya on, we've had Priscilla on. They both talk about missing out on the 2008 Olympics in Beijing as being kind of real watershed moments in their careers. You were in the frame for that as well and also missed out, but you actually traveled to China to support on that tour.
I did.
How I think that personally, and who shared that story with us, I think that speaks massive testament to your character. But how difficult was that for you to be over there supporting but not playing directly?
I'm not actually sure if I was truly in the frame. I mean, great. I mean, if I was, but I was obviously consistently disappointed at not getting a look into the Ferns environment. And then, to travel as my partner was in the team at the time. And so to travel as a supporter and to be there was actually really awesome. And I loved it. And of course, they're singing the national anthem and I'm watching the team and some of my dear friends and stuff, but I don't feel any bitterness. I feel nothing but pride. And I'm looking around and I'm with the other New Zealand supporters, and it's really special to be able to do that. And I'm grateful that I've had that experience as a supporter, because I'm obviously going to get to do that again in a few years when the World Cup comes to New Zealand and Australia. So I don't, I mean, it's I guess from the outside looking in, it's an interesting point of view, but I think for me, it's one of my most cherished memories as a player and as a person, because I think also bearing witness to that as someone who had aspired to be there or had aspirations to be in that position was also very motivating. So again, it was a wonderful experience. I had a great time and I didn't feel any kind of bitterness or resentment. I was actually just bloody stoked to be there.
And you celebrated your 21st birthday away from your family while you were there as well, huh?
I did, but whatever, you just sort of get used to spending. I mean, who else has an opportunity to do that? I spent my birthday in China, having this really bizarre experience. They just become such cool memories. I don't really feel like I missed out on having a 21st at Upper Hutt RSA with heaps of my Bogan college friends. I don't feel like I missed out on anything.
I just want to jump around a little bit and cover off your. So you moved to Germany in 2011 and spent 2 years, and I'm going to butcher this name, SC07 Bad Nuna.
Wow, that was bad. That was terrible. Bad Nuna.
Bad Nuna.
I don't think I've ever heard it be called Bad Nuna. That's a good one.
Yes. Again, we've got themes. Steve butchering overseas club names is another theme on this. So we're actually going to start Two Beers bingo that you can follow when you're at home, just ticking off the cliche things that we say or the things that run through. But that was one of the ones.
So how did that come about, and how were the 2 years in Germany?
Yeah, it came about. So as I say, at the World Cup, there was some interest from some people, and at the time Rebecca Smith was playing at Wolfsburg, and so she was also this is legit, this is real. If you're interested, you should come over. And so it just kind of came about that way. So after the World Cup, I got back to Auckland, went back to my job, and then literally a month later was packing my bags and heading over to Bad Nuna for my first professional contract on it's funny you mentioned birthdays, but I flew over on my 25th birthday, I think it was. I was in the air and actually ended up losing the day because I was traveling, which again kind of made it a non-birthday to remember. Yeah, and so I was back there, quit my job, everything. My dad and my brother drove up to Auckland from Wellington, took all my stuff down, started selling it. I think my brother pocketed the money. And yeah, that was the start of my, I guess, overseas professional journey. The 2 years that I spent at Bad Nuna, I'll be honest with you, were really tough. Not an easy place to go. I was there for a year with Katie. Yeah, that's right. That was really, really difficult. but it was character building, I suppose, and opened a lot of other doors, and I think challenged me as a person and kind of got me interested in different parts of life in the world that I normally wouldn't have been exposed to. So all in all, really cool, but certainly a challenging experience from a footballing point of view.
How big a step up was it from Eastern Suburbs training 2 nights a week to going into that environment?
I don't know if it was like, I mean, yes, it was a step up. Some of the other players on that team were exceptional, like full German internationals and things like that. So it was like a step up in quality, but also just a totally different attitude. The German attitude could not be further away from the Eastern Suburbs attitude. It's like,
well, you were partying almost every night in the suburbs, weren't you?
I wouldn't say every night. It's probably a bit of a stretch, but there was a fair few nights across a long period of time. Maybe, I'm not too sure. So it was certainly not like that. And Bad Neuna was also like a very sleepy part of the world. It was actually a place where old people went to die. So there wasn't a lot going on, just football.
Was the language barrier an issue?
Yeah, it was at first. I started to learn German though, and then got relatively comfortable, particularly after a couple of years. So yeah, it was challenging at the start for sure. And I would immediately recommend to any player going over there, like, you need to get your head around the language, because it's not, I don't think you can necessarily have the arrogance that English is going to be spoken on your behalf. And also it's just a good way to get a little bit more connected to the community and the culture more broadly outside of football too.
Did your coach speak English?
Yeah, he was English. He was actually from the UK, but he'd been in Germany so long that still all of the trainings and everything were in English. But if we needed special information off him, like he spoke English as a first language.
Right. And so after your second season there, then you got the chance to go to Liverpool and spent 2 years in Liverpool. Was that like a dream move? How did that rate?
I wasn't quite there for 2 years. I was there for like a season. And it actually...
Faulty notes.
Shit, I always pride myself on getting this stuff right.
Guys, it's fine. I won't tell anyone. Yeah, actually, a few of my teammates from Bad Neuna had gone to Liverpool, so it was also like cool to carry on from a footballing point of view with them. And like, yeah, I think it sounds great, and we won the league as well. So we won the title that year, which was really cool. Liverpool I actually thought was a really cool city as well, so I enjoyed the vibe of that little part of England as well. I think though, like, anytime you have these brands in football, right, and sometimes it sounds better than what it actually is. And Liverpool's a brilliant example, because back then they were the first team in England to really like professionalize, to get players in every day and work with them every day and pay them well and set them all up. And that wasn't really happening in the Super League, in the Women's Super League at that time. But fast forward to 2020, and Liverpool have just got relegated from the Women's Super League in England. So it also shows that, like, sometimes just being part of a brand like Liverpool doesn't count for much. It actually doesn't mean that you're going to get treated as a professional, because evidently they've now just been relegated out of the top league, and that should never happen. Like, you would never find in men's football, like if Liverpool, the team that won this year, if in 6 seasons, they were relegated from the Premier League, like, no way is that happening. But that happens in women's football. So yeah, it was great to go to such a big club and a big brand, I think. But I would also say, like, don't be fooled by that at the same time, because Liverpool's a great example of that, and how they've let their women's team decline.
They were wearing Warrior equipment at that stage. How shit was that brand, or was it good? Because I didn't buy any Liverpool merch when they did go to Warrior, because I was just outraged.
I mean, it was cute. It was okay. It was fine to train in. I wouldn't have worn it to all of those parties that apparently I've been going to over the years, but it was okay to train in.
Good, Gregorius.
How was your standing in the Liverpool team? Were you like the starting, the main striker, or were you like...
Not at all. No. Not at all. I was like really just trying to get minutes, and I came in late. I wasn't there at the start of the season because at that time in England, they weren't playing a traditional European season. They actually played sort of more like a summer season from March to October, and I arrived in late May, I think. So it was actually really difficult, and they had at the time like a German striker, an English international playing up front, so it was not easy. It was a very stacked team. That's probably why we won the league. But I was not a starter by any stretch. I was scrapping for minutes.
Yeah, well, that got to be tough too, right? Away from home, and you're trying to force your way into a team. If you're more established, it's easier to sort of connect with teammates, is it?
Yeah, definitely. But I think that's just football. Like, it just is what happens from time to time. You just have to accept that at moments in your career, even if you are in good form or whatever, you maybe don't get the recognition or the minutes that you want, and then at other points you do. So yeah, you just kind of roll with it. I think I'd gotten very used to that roller coaster by that point.
When you are grafting away at club level and you're overseas, how bright a beacon are those Football Ferns tours to join and go and catch up with your mates again? Are you just circling those FIFA dates in the calendar and just can't wait to get there?
Yeah, they're so bright. Really, they are, because particularly if you're in an environment like Germany, or when I was in Japan as well, where you're struggling just to understand and be understood, and then all of a sudden every 3 or 4 months you have the opportunity to be around people that know you so well, and an environment and a culture that it's like putting on a comfy coat. Like, it just feels so good. You feel so safe and you feel so warm. So they are I think you still, even though the professional game in women's football is getting better and better and better, I think still for the majority of players, particularly Football Ferns, like going away with the national team it's like you say, you circle it on the calendar. You do really look forward to it.
Let's talk about Japan. We've got a quote in front. I won't read it. That's Stephen's role to read quotes, and I won't do it this time. But you've kind of said that it blew your mind about how technical and the standard that it was. How difficult was it to adapt to that? And did you become a better player after being there?
Yes, I became a much better player after being there, I think. It is everything that you kind of see. And I think particularly at that point, like, Japan had won the World Cup in 2011, and I arrived there in 2014. So I was going to the home of the reigning world champions and wanting to learn off them. And I made that decision deliberately because I knew for me and the way that I wanted to go, and for the remainder of my career, I needed to work on the things that the Japanese players were very, very good at, which was that tactical flexibility, that game understanding, and obviously that technical proficiency. And it was incredible. Like, I remember my first training session, like, I had just arrived, so I was like a little bit jet lagged or whatever. I wasn't training, and I was watching, and I was like, I'm not going to be able to, I can't play with these girls. I'm not going to be able to survive. Like, I was just like, I couldn't swivel my head fast enough to follow the ball. It was incredible. So that two and a half years that I spent over there was like, the beginning was like a steep learning curve. Okay, I just need to learn how to keep my head above water. And then once I can do that, I can start to learn to swim, and then I can maybe make some contributions. But it was transformative for me, like on and off the field. Like, what an amazing culture, what an amazing place to be. I met some unbelievably kind and hospitable people. It was a great experience, but very challenging in the beginning from a footballing point of view.
And you didn't play professionally again after that Japan experience, did you? Have I got that wrong?
No, after the 2016 Olympics, I retired from the New Zealand team for the first time, and then I saw out my contract in Japan until December of 2016 and came home after that and didn't play professionally. It was like, again, like you say about how playing for the Ferns being a bright spot, the only reason I was playing professionally was to be a better Football Fern. I obviously wasn't earning enough to set myself up for life or anything like that. Like, it was a means to an end rather than an end in itself. So if I wasn't playing for New Zealand, why would I play professionally? And at that point I was finishing a master's degree too, and I wanted to come home and square that one away too. So that was my last professional contract.
Just back to Japan for a minute. Did you learn the language there as well? And did your coach in Japan speak English, or was there any barriers there?
In a weird way, I did learn the language, which was, I thought learning German was hard. Holy shit, learning Japanese is like next level. I did learn the language. I lived with a host family, and the host family, when I arrived, they had a 3-year-old daughter, 3.5. And so we were about at the same level of speaking Japanese.
That's a good way to do it.
Yeah. And I inadvertently ended up teaching her a little bit of English, and it was hilarious. One day, I think I'd been there maybe 3 or 4 months, and I was going into Tokyo for the day. It was my day off, and so I was saying bye to the mum and the little girl. And I like stumbled through my Japanese and said goodbye, and the little girl in like a Kiwi accent said, "Okay, see you later." And like me and the mum just like both looked at each other, like, and she was just like, and so I inadvertently ended up like, we taught each other. She taught me Japanese, this little 3-year-old, and I taught her, I don't know, colloquial upper hat bogan English or something like that. And it was really, really cool. So that helped, I think, being around that level of Japanese helped my development a lot. But learning the language was tough. Yeah, from time to time, like it's not regular by any stretch. And now when I see photos of the kids, I'm like, I'm getting old. Like that was a long time ago.
Yeah, I'm interested in the dynamic between like a coach and a player that don't speak the same language, because obviously communication is such an important part of a coach-player relationship. And if it's all just sort of sign language and visual cues, like, did you see a lot of that across your time at Germany and Japan, where there was a breakdown in total understanding between player and coach?
Not so much in Germany. In Japan, yeah. And like I was sort of saying with the first story, they ended up getting at my first club a coach in that spoke English just to help me. And he actually spoke a bit of German too. So we would kind of communicate through like English, German, and then my budding Japanese as well. But it was really challenging. And that's when like video analysis plays a big role, and you just have to try and work it out. I actually think like in some ways it's good. I don't think football is as complicated as sometimes we make it out to be. And I think if you don't have the ability to overcomplicate it through language, if you have to keep it simple, if you have to keep the messages simple, it's actually easier for players to digest. It's easier for them to carry that information onto the field. So I had simple tasks. I had like a simple role within the team. We communicated well, but it wasn't complicated. And I actually think I was able to then just adapt and develop also, kind of not so much at my own pace, but also in my own way, because I wasn't getting a ton of information. So I was looking, I was learning, I was trying to read, I guess, body language from my teammates who were also trying to read my movements. So I had to be more deliberate in the things that I did. So I think almost the removal of language kind of removed a lot of levels or layers of complication that can sometimes be there, particularly if you're working with a player every day, like a pro environment. So I actually think the simplicity helped in a way, because I was clear on what I had to do, and I just would go out and do it. And if I got a nod of the head after the game and a pat on the shoulder, good. If he didn't talk to me, then okay, maybe work on that during the week.
You get the idea.
Yeah.
If there's a young sort of football fern teenager who's got options to play in England, Germany, or Japan, which one are you suggesting that they go for? Yeah,
depends on the agent.
And it depends on the age. I wouldn't recommend a 19-year-old go to Japan, for example. I think you have to have a bit more about you. I think it would be too hard for that to be your first professional experience. But the league in Japan, as of next season, is going full pro. So the league that I was playing in, they've introduced a level above or a tier above, and that's going to be fully professional. So I think if you had the ability to be in like a world-class professional environment in a place like Japan, with the ability that they already possess, as like not only in the way that they play, but also just in the way that they train, I think it would be an amazing experience. So I think that would probably be the most rewarding. But I think if I had to pick purely based on the league and the ease of a player from New Zealand in terms of integration, then certainly England, because they are fully professional as well, and it's moving in the right direction. They are doing most of the clubs, not all of them, are doing the right thing.
Yeah. So it's a good segue into your current role at FIFPro. So for those who aren't who don't understand what that is, can you give a real quick synopsis about what a strategy and policy officer does day to day in your line of work?
Well, I think probably understanding what FIFPro does is important. So we're the global player union of unions. So the New Zealand PFA, England PFA, Australia PFA, they all belong to a global body, and that body is FIFPro. And we are the ones that sit down with the likes of FIFA, UEFA, the confederations, club associations, and negotiate as the player representative, so on behalf of players worldwide. So that's the role of FIFPro. And then my role within that is in the strategy and policy relations team. So we develop policy. Obviously, we help shape the strategic negotiations through informed policy research, evidence analysis. And that's very much what my role is about. So in terms of a day-to-day, it changes all the time. It's changed a lot because of coronavirus. And there's like a decent amount of effort spent, I guess, tackling issues and tackling current issues, but also there are like the nuts and bolts of the football industry that we also kind of have a view on, whether that's working and playing conditions or match calendar or the transfer system. Like these are the types of issues that FIFPro as an organization helps to resolve. And then as part of a policy team, I help develop kind of the strategy behind all of those things.
Did you get headhunted for the role? How did they poach you from the other side of the world?
Yeah, I got headhunted. I got headhunted actually at the World Cup, which was
That's interesting.
Yeah, so I was in France, and through the PFA in New Zealand, I had been to a few FIFPro events, and I was known to FIFPro as an organization. I guess they'd heard me speak. They'd known that I was obviously a player and involved in the union movement in our part of the world. And funnily enough, obviously the situation with Andreas in New Zealand football got worldwide attention, particularly in the football and the player union movement. And so they knew about the central kind of role that I'd had within that, and had seen that that's very much like I have that kind of collective spirit, I guess, which is super important to any type of union work. And so I was at the World Cup, and they invited me they were putting together an initiative called the Global Player Council. And we had a meeting in Lyon, and that invited me to that. And I mean, I barely sat down in the chair where they were like, okay, cool, do you want to come and work for us? And I was like, I'm sorry, what? But yeah, and then sort of they invited me. So I was in France, I was in Lyon with them, and then they invited me up to Amsterdam to talk about it in a little bit more detail immediately after the World Cup. I got back to New Zealand and yeah, resigned from my role at Capital Football, let like Sky Sport and all of them know that I was pursuing an opportunity overseas, and then I was on the plane again in September.
So is the job, you know, when you get these jobs and they pull you from the other side of the world and you kind of think you know what it is, but you don't really know until you get there. Is it what you thought it was? And do you feel comfortable in the role now?
I feel comfortable now.
Yeah, I say no. Otherwise, your boss is going to listen and be like, "We've got to get rid of her."
I mean, if he does, he does, but that'd be pretty stink. I didn't really know what I was expecting. I thought that it would be like the work I was doing with the PFA in New Zealand, but kind of like on steroids. And it is to an extent. I think principally the values are still the same. Like, can we just have a player-centric view? Like, that's really, the industry will not progress in a sustainable and meaningful way if you don't have a player-centric view on everything, particularly in women's football, where it is a developing industry. So I think that's essentially what it is, which was what I was expecting. I think I'm still kind of, I guess, blown away by the impact that we can have. I'm still very much like, I feel very privileged to be in some of the rooms and some of the conversations. And then also, like, at the heart of it, it's talking to players and representing their perspectives with decision makers. And that's not difficult for me. I've always done that, really. I did that in New Zealand, and now I'm just doing it overseas. So it feels I wouldn't say it feels fully natural, because sometimes I'm like, how the fuck did I get here? But at the heart of it, it's actually very honest. It's very good work, and I'm really passionate about it.
But your dream job's to be a librarian, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I'm still like hanging on to that. I've shared that vision for my life with many people, and I am working towards it in a funny way. What I'm doing right now will feed that dream.
How did you actually get started with the PFA? Was it post-retirement, or were you a player representative while you were in the Ferns actively, before you were in the Ferns actively again?
I was that. I was a player representative when I was with the Ferns. And then Andrew Scott Hellman, who's the general counsel for the PFA, once I got back to New Zealand, like I barely got back to New Zealand after being in Japan and retiring from the national team, he invited me out for lunch. And he was like, cool, when do you want to start working for us? And I was like, same thing. I was like, I'm sorry, what? And he was just it was really like a mentor. He just really was like, I think you've displayed characteristics that would be very useful to this type of work. And they kind of gave me a blank slate in terms of what I would want to do, but it was effectively the same thing. Like I just continued to represent the views, obviously now not only of the Ferns, but also of the All Whites, to the organization as like a player as well, myself, a former player for that brief 18 months. And it was just really about how, I guess that the attitude for the New Zealand PFA was, how can they integrate my skills rather than trying to fit me into a specific job. And so I ended up doing a lot of work. I still feel very passionately about player development in terms of personal development, on and off the field, having that balance, and whether that's through dual careers or education, whatever it might be. And so I did a lot of early work with the PFA around that, and then started to get involved in a little bit more international, I guess, governance type of work with the PFA. And that was how I got involved with FIFPro. So I think I've just been lucky in a lot of ways that people have probably recognized things in me that I maybe wouldn't have really necessarily recognized myself. And that's how I've sort of found myself in these very fortunate positions.
You mentioned to take the gig in Sweden, you had to leave behind Sky. You had made, like I said at the start, you'd made quite a mark, I thought, on the football public with your broadcasting and the way you came across on screen. Was there ever a point where you thought that was going to be the direction you would go full time?
Yeah, I loved it. I didn't think I would. And it was not something, again, that I'd ever imagined myself doing. But it was Dennis Katsanos that said to me, again, once I got back to New Zealand from being overseas, was like, you were really fun to interview as a player. Have you thought about interviewing others? Or have you thought about speaking? And so I was like, okay, like, whatever, I'll give it a go. And then he like just kept kind of sending more and more stuff my way. And I loved it. It was like and I think because it wasn't really something I had pictured myself doing, I didn't really think it wasn't really something I got worked up about. I never felt nervous before a broadcast. I just spoke very freely and honestly about whatever was going on the field in front of me or around the game. So I did think, and I'd had discussions with Sky about taking it a little bit more, not a little bit more seriously, but a little bit to the next level and being more involved more regularly. But it coincided with the opportunity with FIFPro. So I agonized over it, mostly to do with Sky, because they had put a very good offer, a very good opportunity in front of me, but I had to be like, look, I'm going to go with this one, but thank you so much. And if you ever need a Dutch correspondent, please look me up. So I was actually very sad to walk away from it. And I think in a parallel universe, I would have really pursued it.
It's a good position to be in, isn't it? Having two great offers in front of you. Was there ever an occasion when you were working for Sky where you had to critique or say something perhaps not in a positive light about any of your former teammates or friends, or praise their performance?
Not really, because a lot of my commentary was around the Phoenix. So I never, and by the time there were games to comment on for the Ferns, I was playing in them, which was, So I never really had to commentate or give expert analysis on really about any of Yeah. Not any of that live analysis for any of their players. That would have been interesting, but I never really had to do it. Just for, I think the things I was most critical about was with Phoenix.
It's safe there.
Join the club.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's cast a bit of a critical eye over your playing career, particularly the period between 2011 and 2016. In 2012 at the Olympics, the team qualified for a knockout stages of a major event for the first time. And it really seemed to be, well, that was kind of a platform. New Zealand high performance sport pumped a lot of money in. And it was, I think 2016, it was kind of the goal was to medal, right? Didn't quite happen. Do you look back with frustration at what happened on the pitch? Because it seemed between major events, there were really good results on the road, but then when we got to a major tournament, it just didn't seem to kind of click or go our way.
Yeah, I can be analytical about it. I think what happened is there was a rate of progress, undoubtedly, for the Ferns between 2011 and 2016. I think what was underestimated was the rate of progress for other countries. The sport just it grew exponentially, and it grew a hell of a lot faster in other parts of the world because they have different ingredients that we just don't have in New Zealand. And I also think what we never managed to do as a team was be good enough to make our own luck. And so it was probably just a few percentage points that were missing, particularly at the big events. And that can be as much about individual decision making on the ball as it can be about tactics, which we also didn't always get right. And I think we suffered, and we still suffer, and we will suffer for some time, about this kind of lack of genuine depth. And without genuine depth, you do miss the push that gives you those extra percentage points. So if I'm being honest, my biggest regrets weren't in that time period. I think I'm looking at last year's World Cup as the biggest frustration of my career. I think we relied a lot on, between 2011 and 2016, we relied a lot on things that were out of our control. So a lot of the games that we played between major events, we were just waiting to be invited. We didn't have the resource to choose and put together probably the best preparation. We just played America a lot. Why? Because they could afford to fly us over. So we weren't really in a position to kind of control our own destiny, and we didn't really also improve enough to create our own luck. And then you just had the rest of the world just was going like that, with millions being poured in that we just weren't able to pour in as a New Zealand team. And we got the investment from high performance sport after we got the good results, not before. So also when you need the help the most is before you get good, not after you get good. And because then you're also kind of chasing your tail a wee bit too. So I think there's a lot of different things that went on between 2011 and 2016 that cumulatively are very frustrating, but also a little bit so out of the control that it's okay, I'm not gonna die on this hill. It's just it is what it is. But I think last year was the real heartbreaker.
And Sarah, what about you as a player? Did you fulfill your potential?
I think it's two different things, right? I look back on my career and I'm completely satisfied. That's one thing. I don't feel I'm not jaded, I'm not bitter. Everything that happened, I'm very comfortable with, and I feel very satisfied. Do I feel like I reached my potential? No, not really. But I'm also not, I don't even know what that potential could have been, but I worked as hard as I could for as long as I could at the same time. But yeah, if things had gone differently, if different opportunities had fallen into my lap, yeah, maybe things could have been different. And my potential, maybe the ceiling would have pushed a wee bit. I did everything I could within my control, but sometimes you need other things to go your way to really reach your potential. So I think all in all, I'm very satisfied with my career, but I think I do think about whether or not I should have kept playing professionally. I do think about whether or not taking that time off after the Olympics and then coming back in 2018, if that was good or bad. It's probably arguments both ways, but So it is a little bit like, okay, what will I wonder, kind of that parallel universe thing again. I wonder if this had happened instead of that, maybe I could have got a few more percentage points myself, because I also think between 2011 and 2016, you always, for me, the first place you start is within yourself. Whenever there's a failure, you don't point fingers. You're like, shit, like, what was my role? What was my contribution? What else could I have done? And so I think about it in that point of view. I had a very central role in the team. Maybe if I had done things differently, we could have achieved different things and could have maybe better reached our potential as a group. So I sort of think about it like that. But all in all, like 100 games, 10 years, like, are you joking? I'm so satisfied with that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like 100 caps, 24 goals, second on the all-time goal scoring list. You look back and you go, yeah, that's all right.
Can I just say that's a great reflection. I ask most guests that, and I think that is the most articulate answer of very quickly and concisely summing up a pretty complicated thought pattern. So that was great. Sarah, we've obviously had some pretty exciting news in the last couple of weeks. I think it was about 3 weeks ago, 5 a.m. on a Friday morning, it was announced that New Zealand and Australia are going to be co-hosting the Women's World Cup. Where were you and what time of day was it, and how did you take in that news?
I was almost exactly where I'm sat right now, looking at my laptop at Gianni Infantino eventually spitting out, it felt like it took forever, eventually spitting out those words. Yeah, and it was the end of a work day for me here in Europe. So yeah, it's like 5, 6 in the evening or something like that. And yeah, I just was like, okay.
Are you still closely connected to like the Ferns sort of WhatsApp group and things? Like, what was your immediate reaction?
I'm not in the WhatsApp group where I think
I'm coming back.
No, I'm not in the WhatsApp group where I think they were doing cartwheels, but like, I mean, I was texting Riley. I had messaged a few of the other players, even people that I knew that were in kind of the New Zealand football scene back in New Zealand. So yeah, I mean, you, Shay, yeah, exactly. So I mean, and then the job that I'm in obviously is very football centric. So there was a lot of activity going on my phone, put it that way, with regards to the news. But also, like, we were trying to put together like a player reaction panel for 8 o'clock that evening, 9 o'clock that evening too, with players from New Zealand, Australia, and Colombia and Canada. So I was also like, had this kind of like operational kind of mindset, was like, okay, cool, everyone get excited, but don't forget you need to be on the Zoom call so we can record this damn panel. So yeah, I mean, it was a pretty cool day though. It was pretty awesome.
I think you mentioned you look forward to coming to New Zealand as a fan and watching the games. Should we put a little shout out to Sky? That could be a little working holiday.
Hello.
You could maybe host a few shows while you're back and do a few bits and pieces.
If anyone from Sky is listening, you still have my number. Don't even play like, oh, what? You're yeah. So definitely, I would love to. I mean, not only a working holiday, but like, just, it's going to be so exciting. So just being in and around like people who are excited and talking about it. And I know that from a broadcasting and media point of view, a part of me also, I don't think New Zealand quite knows what's going to hit it at the same time. Yeah. Like, I was in France last year, and this is going to be bigger, brighter, better than anything New Zealand has probably ever borne witness to, let alone hosted. So, I mean, I feel like Sky are going to need all the help they can get. So, like, Dennis, bro, if you're listening, hit me up.
We'll get him on. Actually, we should get Dennis on as a guest, Steve.
He would have some stories.
Yeah, he would be.
Sarah, when the under-17 women took bronze in Uruguay, was there any part of you that, I don't know, like, I guess I mentioned in the opening remarks around that kind of golden generation from 2006. Was there any part of you that thought, shit, finally, here we go again? Like, there's a new group of players that potentially can kind of carry that mantle?
Yes, definitely. I think I'm always hopeful. I watch every youth tournament and I'm hopeful for a golden generation to emerge. I think 2017, the under-17 team in Uruguay, I mean, that was phenomenal. It was really exceptional. I think it's hard, though. I think the conditions in 2006 were different to the ones that we're in now, where it is very hard for a player to kick on immediately, because it requires, and it required in 2006, between 2006 and 2012 in particular, it required a lot of gambling. Because like I said earlier, in my opinion, you can really only get good at international football by playing international football. So John, when he took over the Football Ferns, he was giving opportunities to Rhea and Abby and Ali and Annalie Longo, and like at such a young age. And so they were developing on the world stage. Now, what you can't do in this current environment is give that under 17 group the same type of opportunity, because the game's different. Like the competition and the attention on an international team like the Football Ferns probably doesn't allow for that. So this is what I mean about getting creative about how you would then cultivate that talent, and how you would then really work with that group to graduate them into senior international football, because it is like, I can't even describe to you how big the jump is. It's massive. And it's not always going to be, and it's certainly not going to be plugged by playing in the National Women's League. It's certainly not going to be plugged by playing for Eastern Suburbs or whatever. And I'm not knocking those environments. I'm just saying, like, you're falling off a cliff, really, in terms of like the ability to really hone that talent if that's what you're relying on. So I think it is challenging to offer the same opportunities that were offered to my generation 14, 15 years ago, if I'm being quite frank. And I think that will, depending on how creative they want to be with that group, that might halt them actually kicking on, because actually very few of them have cracked the Ferns in the last couple of years off the back of that tournament.
How important then is a New Zealand entity in the Australian W League in terms of some of that development? Does that plug that gap, or is it still too big?
It is. I've said this for years. It is the missing piece. Like we will turn a corner as a country if we can get that established, but not if that works in isolation. Like not if that team is siloed and is not connected to the overall pathway. Like what New Zealand has to do is make sure that every single rung on the ladder is integrated, because if it's not, like, we don't have the depth, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have any of the other things that would allow for different conflicting interests to take hold at different times. Like the W League, and I think the W League in Australia, from their point of view, has to have a really good long hard look at itself and the way that it fits into the global international professional club game, because at the minute it's a little sister to the US League, and now so many of the Matildas don't play in the W League. This will be the first season where like the top 20 Australian players are all overseas. So it also has to now look at itself as a league in terms of how it fits into the overall ecosystem of professional women's football. So yes, I think in terms of like its place in the pyramid, like it's so important, but it has to be so linked and integrated to everything else that's going on in the development of these young women that like it's going to take a hell of a lot of collaboration, probably an element of creativity and creative thinking. And it's going to have to take people probably putting aside their own interests and developing shared interests around the development of our best talent. Because I think if it happens in isolation, it'll probably become part of the problem rather than part of the solution.
Geez, I think, Steve, I think while Greg has said that Scylla is the ultimate PHL, I think after those comments, Greg is top of the pile for me.
Wow.
Cool. We'll make sure this goes in the podcast so she can hear about it. But I mean it. She's ruthless. She has a streak in her that I will never match. And I'm a little bit intimidated by her, if I'm being honest.
Me too.
I'm not. Just jumping back to France, you said you were in France. Was there any thought at the conclusion of the World Cup that I'm done? Or was Tokyo, it's kind of easy to say now that it's no longer on the table, but was Tokyo was that going to potentially be the swan song on the pitch for you?
No, I mean, when I originally spoke to Andreas in 2018, end of 2017, I had agreed with him that I would only play until the World Cup. So there was that. I put everything into my training and everything into myself to be the best that I could be in France in 2019. I was not thinking beyond that. And then it was so heartbreaking. Like the way that we went out of that tournament, like, ripped me. And so I also, like, a part of me was like, I don't think I can go through this again. I don't think I can, like, mentally and emotionally put myself through another major tournament, because I had just put so much into that one and I was so spent. Like, and that lasted for like weeks after returning from the tournament. Like, I went back to New Zealand and I wasn't okay. So I don't think I could have carried on through again, like, to be the person and the player that the team would have needed at another major tournament. And then I was obviously, like, really close to 100 caps, and I think that was the only time where I thought selfishly, like, okay, I want that. I want that. Maybe I won't go to Tokyo, and I'll give myself some time. And then the opportunity with FIFPro came up as well, and I was like, okay, maybe this is a sign that life is moving in a different direction. But selfishly, I wanted 100 caps. And I think that's the only time where I really thought about myself and what I wanted, and the type of, like, you talk about a swan song, like, I just wanted that, really. I think I'm so much more use, I think, to football and the football industry as a former player than I would have been if I had hung on till Tokyo. The team didn't need that, and particularly feeling how I was feeling after the World Cup, which was just so gutted. I don't think I would have been in a good enough position.
So was there a sense of relief almost to get that 100th cap and close the door on the international career after the World Cup?
Yep. It was a huge sense of relief. I felt like, particularly once I'd got to Amsterdam and I was still training a little bit and trying to be an international player, because I didn't want to, like, take the piss either. It was really tough. It was really, really challenging. And I was relieved to say goodbye to that part of my life and finally, really finally, close the door for the second time. It was a huge sense of relief. And I'm grateful that Tom and the staff and the players were willing to let me do it that way, because I also had the luxury, which I know very few players get to do this, of, like, planning it and thinking about it and reflecting on my time and reflecting on, I don't like this word, but, like, the legacy or whatever of the last 10 years. So I was hugely relieved, but, man, incredibly grateful, because I've kind of got to write that script too. And I'm one of the very few players in international football that gets to do that.
Well, maybe your time on the pitch isn't necessarily over, because I do know that you actually are a world champion. World Masters Games 2017. You were part of a squad that won a gold medal. And is there any chance of you coming back, if it goes ahead, for Tokyo 2021 to defend that gold medal with some of those other Ferns, and maybe with some new Ferns brought into that squad to really freshen that group up?
Yeah, like, I mean, I haven't honestly thought about that at all. Like, not even for a split second. And I'm also like, I literally have not kicked a ball since smashing in that penalty at the Algarve Cup in my 100th game. And I feel like I almost don't want to kick a ball ever again. Like, I want that to be my last kick of football ever. So I think at this point, I mean, never say never, but I feel like I'm a very firm no.
Wow. Some of your teammates are outraged.
I don't give a fuck about them. I've got my own shit to worry about.
I know you need to get to work, so we'll wrap up soon. There's just a few little bits and pieces I want to get to. Shay's got this magnificent list of notes. It suggests that you played with the men in your last couple of years in New Zealand at Miramar. Did you train with? What was that experience like?
Yeah, so that was, like I was saying, the build up to last year's World Cup. I had played in the Women's League and the W League in the Capital Football Region prior to that, and just thought it was me and Anna Green, actually, another football fan who was training and playing in Wellington. So we linked up with Miramar, and and trained with their second team, so the team below the Central League. And that was really good. I mean, it was an interesting insight into the way men train.
How different was that?
Oh, it's so different. Like, I mean,
you've been really kind of diplomatic around it, but there's clearly something more to it.
I mean, it's just very different. Greenie and I spent a lot of time rolling our eyes, put it that way, because like just the way that boys egg each other on, and like, you know, this banter culture and things like that. Like, I think which is in women's football, but fuck me, like. The way that they go about it, maybe it's just Miramar, but you do see the differences. And actually, even from like a footballing point of view, seeing the way that men and women respond to coaching and to training and to different forms of motivation and things like that was actually quite fascinating, because I get asked that question a lot, like particularly for young people, like, oh, my daughter wants to go into a boys' environment, like, or, you know, and that type of thing. So you do get asked a bit about whether or not men's football, boys, youth football should play a role in the development of promising young female players, or old female players, as Greenie and I were last year. So it was actually really cool. And to be fair, like, the boys were brilliant about it. Not just the ones that were in the Miramar team, but also the opposition and things like that. And Miramar as a club were very understanding about obviously a particular set of needs that Greenie and I had. Like, we were in and out quite a bit because we were touring so much with the national team, and, you know, even like the little things like, okay, well, the girls need a separate changing room, or like that kind of thing. Like, there's a lot to work out, but everyone was really brilliant about it, and the club were, I think, quite proud of us, even in only the short period of time that we were there. And I'm like extremely grateful that they were such a big part of our prep for the World Cup. It made a huge difference.
Was it a good fit for the level? Was like the sort of physical side of the game, was that the right level for you guys?
It was for those reasons. Tactically, it's just so different. But it is good for, I think, particularly the training, like the speed, like just regularly in that training environment. The games are a little bit different, because I think that is where you start to see, I mean, men's club football and international women's football are very different beasts. I don't think you can find. I'm of the opinion that you only get good at playing international football by playing international football. It's very difficult to replicate that even in the professional women's club game. So it was never going to be something that immediately made sense or was immediately translatable to international football. But I think the training in particular, and the speed and the physicality, and I think it was kind of always at quite a good level. And the Miramar team at that time was young, and they were very technical, and they were very fast. And the way that I could supplement what I wasn't getting at those men's trainings with other trainings, whether that was one-on-one or with linking up with people from the New Zealand football setup, it formed a very, I think, almost a very complete training environment, even though it was a little bit outside of the norm of how you would normally train for a World Cup.
I've got a question here, and we sort of alluded to it at the start of the show. I think you took notice of it in particular. So I'm interested to see how this goes. I'm not 100% sure what I'm asking, but who is more of a PHL, you or Priscilla Duncan?
Priscilla Duncan.
Wow.
I tell you, the key difference between Scylla and I is, like, and she'll understand this, is I'm able to put the PHL side of me to bed at the end of the day. She's always on. She's always on. Like, if she's not fully focused during the day, then she's reading about it at night. You know, like, she's just always looking for that next step. So she's ruthless in a way that I'll never be.
Just speaking of Priscilla Duncan, on the Priscilla Duncan episode, I sort of made reference that Kirsty Yallop and Tamika Butt, now Tamika Yallop, almost followed the Priscilla and Katie blueprint. What became apparent to me in research for this pod is that maybe you're following the Kirsty and Tamika blueprint in terms of where you're sort of heading. And all I wanted to ask you was, I unsuccessfully played a bridesmaid at Stephen's wedding. Have you got any tips for me on how that might kind of play out, or how I might be able to approach that differently?
Bridesmaids are elusive creatures, Shay, and I understand that, like, you can fall on your face a wee bit at times, and like, I'll be honest with you, I don't have any tips aside from like make use of the open bar, which is usually present at weddings. But like, don't make too much use of it. Do you know what I mean? Like, no one likes a sloppy guy. Like, it's just
I tell them this every Saturday night.
One day it'll sink in. But no, I had the I'm very fortunate. I wouldn't say that. I like to think that I trod my own path. You know, that I go my own way in life. But I was very fortunate to meet someone pretty cool at the wedding of Kirsty and Meeks last year, and yeah, that person's still in my life, and I'm very fond of her, which is super useful as
well. Steve, one of my favorite things, one of my kind of cool memories. I was in Houston last year at on a New Zealand secondary school girls tour. I was a tour leader for that one, and the Dash were playing Seattle Reign.
Yeah, Reign FC.
Yeah, at in Houston, and we were taking the team to the game, and I noticed, I can't remember whether it was you or whether it was Emma Kitty, but I saw like, oh, there's 2 Football Ferns in Houston. What an amazing like opportunity. So I linked up with these 2 at the game, and I was sitting next to Sarah, and Kitty was egging me on, like, ask her why she's here. Ask her why she's here. I was like, how? Because Emma's partner, wife, are they married?
Wife.
Jodie?
Yeah, Jodie, yeah.
Was playing for one team, and Kitty just kept nudging me, going, ask Sarah why she, and Sarah was very, very sheepish, and I didn't work out why until just recently, but she was there supporting.
She was playing, my partner, she's at that time for Reign FC, so it was early actually in our relationship, so that's probably why I was a little bit sheepish, but I'm also not a particularly, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm private by any stretch of the imagination, but I also wouldn't say that I paint what I'm up to on the walls either. But yeah, it
took a while for it to become Instagram official, and it is now, because I checked that, and once I saw that it was out there, I was like, we can talk about it.
Great. Yeah, love that.
I think it's probably a good place for us to end, Steve.
Yeah, I think so. That's been great. Sarah, thank you so much for your time. I know you're exceptionally busy, and I know you've got work to get to, but I found that great, 90 minutes, and we've covered a lot. It's great to meet you virtually, and hopefully when you come back to New Zealand, we can cross paths in real life.
Definitely. We can get a real beer, and I suppose I sit between you guys. Is that the dynamic that you go for in physical life as well?
Yeah, until I get too sloppy, and then I got to go home,
and then I'll take them home.
Jesus. Wow, I cannot wait to have that full between 2 beers experience. Wow.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thank you, guys. That was cool. I enjoyed it.